Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. My guest today, who I'm very excited to introduce to all of you, is author Tracy Yokas. She wrote the book Bloodlines, which I spent the last 2 days reading, could not put down. And I want you all to know her. I want you to hear her story. So we are going to get into it. Tracy, welcome and tell us a little bit more about you.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm so excited about this. Yes, I'm Tracy Yokas. I'm an author, an artist, an advocate. I love talking about mental health. I can't get enough of it. I live in Southern California with my husband. My daughter is doing well. We're going to get more into that later. I am just thrilled to share our story, as hard as it is, because I know when I was going through the events I depict in the book, I felt so alone. I felt like we were the only family on the planet going through what we were going through, that no one could possibly understand the level of suffering and pain we were all experiencing. And I would come to find out in really a couple years, not that long, that of course that is ridiculous. There are just so many people going through it, but it's part of what we feel. And the isolation, pulling ourselves back from our lives, and the shame I felt around my inadequacies, perceived inadequacies of my mothering, and just all the things are actually so common. And knowing you're not alone in regard to all of these things is such a crucial first step to reaching out for help and then to healing.
Okay, well said. Okay, so tell us the story. Give us the backstory. What happened? What was the family crisis? And what led you to writing this book?
Okay, so in 2012, my daughter was 13. It was the summer before her eighth grade year of school, and my mom very unexpectedly passed away. She did not live nearby us, but my daughter and my mother were very close. And the longer I've been doing this work, anecdotally, I'm hearing over and over and over again that significant loss is playing into scenarios just like ours. So I hope someone who studies this sort of thing and then the aftermath is studying it so we have better ways to help our teens through these experiences. But for us, what happened was 2, 3 weeks after my mom's death, my daughter woke up one morning and she was no longer that hungry, which at first wasn't very concerning because it was like, okay, she's got 1 year of middle school left, all the things we'd been talking about with the pediatrician over the years, like trying to keep an eye on her weight because weight, body image issues are part of our history. It's part of the trauma that I experienced as well when I was young. So I thought, okay, maybe she's going to be able to do what I was never able to do. This was my thinking then. And, get her shit together, all the things that we
Right.
think about negatively about ourselves.
Mhm.
My daughter's not going to suffer these same things. So, but very quickly it escalated. That was the beginning. And it was a very quick slide into receiving an official diagnosis of an eating disorder, which morphed over time. So they just settled on NOS, which is not otherwise specified. Then there was the addition of severe depression and anxiety, which was actually never an official diagnosis, but was clearly evident in
Right.
her thoughts and speech and behavior. So her pediatrician very quickly, about I'd say right nearly after her first symptoms, I took her to the pediatrician, which so many mothers and parents do, so that the doctor could say, look, you're in puberty, you're exercising all the time, you need a little more nutrition. Here's what I want you to do. And it's like, yay, she's going to do
Mhm.
it. She
Right.
got the word that this is not healthy. She's not eating enough to keep her body running the way it's supposed to. But of course, that did not happen. And so, very quickly after that, the pediatrician was like, you need professional help. So, we sought out an eating disorder specialist. And unfortunately, it was a series of treatments that were ineffective. And in fact, well, I shouldn't say they were ineffective. They just didn't help my daughter for whatever reason. So, a couple of months after that, it was an eating disorder clinic near the house where she went after school. And then self harm entered the picture, and that got significantly worse over the week. So then it was pull her out of school all day at the eating. I mean, this is a lengthy, journey we went
Right.
on with many attachment points to the system, which I outline in the book. but it included hospitalizations, residential treatment a couple of times. So it was a lengthy process of everyone seemingly being in chaos and trying to and fear. Let's be clear, we were
Yeah.
terrified because she wasn't eating enough to stay alive, and then she started eating more, but then the self-harm came up, and so there were many ways that she was endangering her own life, and so we were all just trying to figure out how to get this behavior to stop.
You said that quickly, and it is, I know, because it's a lot,
It's
right?
a
And
lot,
it's like
yeah.
we could spend hours on what you just said. Um, so for the listener, what Tracy's talking about is intensive outpatient, which is an IOP. It sounds like you started with an IOP, then you went to PHP, which
No, we started with a PHP.
you did.
So
Yep.
that was the after school every day, Saturday
Okay.
mornings, and then the
Yep.
escalation. So pulling her out of school, that became the IOP every day, no
Okay.
school.
Okay.
And then they were the ones who recommended residential because the self-harming was really getting out of, well, it was out of control. There's just no other way
Yeah.
to say it.
Right.
And they felt that she just was so not safe that there was no other option.
Okay. So the PHP, the IOP, the inpatient treatment, the residential treatment, that is what you and your family went through. And that's a lot. I mean, that in and of itself is a lot. And I can't imagine what it was like. I mean, just the mental and the emotional load of having to make those decisions as parents as to what do we do now? Okay, what's the next course? And you're relying on the professionals in the field of eating disorders, mental health, to sort of be the guidepost to say, go that direction, no, go that direction, right? And that was not lost on me that you and your husband is Theo?
Yes.
Yeah. You and Theo were like, and I think you were the one who was spearheading it, right? But it's like truly like uh, it was well said. I think a therapist or one of the clinicians at one point in your journey said to you, it's like playing whack a mole. But I thought it was like whack a mole of where to go next and who is the best fit for our family as far as therapists goes and who's the best fit for my daughter, who will she connect with and really find that right fit with. And that was a journey in and of itself. And I really, my heart went out to you as a parent about how hard that part was.
Gosh, I really appreciate that because that was not what that particular clinician was trying to say. I mean, she was specifically talking about the behaviors
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
different, diagnoses that my daughter was suffering with and experiencing. But for sure, you're absolutely right. Because one of the most devastating parts of this journey at that time was that and I had a master's degree in counseling psychology by that point, which
Mm,
filled me further with shame because I felt like somehow that should have inured us to
sure.
being, suffering these things,
Yep.
which I didn't tell anybody back then because of my shame around it. But at least I knew what people were saying. But what happened was every single person I talked to had a different answer.
Yeah.
So if this is the system for parents who don't know what people are talking about, who don't have any experience, who have to rely on the experts to tell us each next step as our person we love most in the world is suffering and getting sicker and her life is becoming more and more endangered for a variety of reasons and we just keep getting different messages from everyone, where does that leave us? Well, that actually leaves us right back where we started, which is
Yeah.
on our own because let's just say the word liability. I say it in the book because it's such a painful thing, but it's also true. Like now that we're so far removed from that period of time, I can talk about it with less, rage and everything else. But I mean, obviously, a treatment center and especially a residential treatment center where you're sending your child to live with strangers and strange children and who knows what
Right.
has a lot of liability if a child were to follow through on the ultimate harmful type of behavior and die by
Sure.
suicide. So while it rationally makes sense, it is absolutely devastating part of the process that there's all of these, like, if you want to look at, because a wheel comes up later in the, in the book, in the conversation, but if you want to look at your child and yourself as the hub, and there's all of these spokes going out of where you're trying to get help, and they're hardly, I won't say never, they're hardly speaking to each other. They're hardly communicating. They're
Yeah.
certainly all giving back to the hub different answers. I mean, you're still sitting in the hub, like, what the actual F are we supposed to do here? And you're left on your own ultimately. Ultimately, we
Yeah.
parents are left on our own to make the decision because it's our child, and that's just how it is.
It's it underscores the importance of collaboration amongst the professionals that are treating, in this case, your child. The importance of myself, me having been in that field, specifically eating disorders almost 30 years ago now, but the importance of picking up the phone and calling the psychiatrist, calling the therapist at the PHP that my now new client came from, talking to the residential treatment facility that's in Arizona, we're in Illinois. Call them. You got to get a release of information signed, and you got to talk to them about what they were like when they were in that. What are the issues? What were you dealing with? How is this person coming to me now? Just give me all the stuff I need to know it in order to best treat my new client. And it sounds like none of that. There was no handoff.
Very little. I don't
Very
want to say
little.
none,
Okay.
because there was paperwork exchanged. Yes,
Right.
we had to, sign releases and all of that stuff. But the depth of conversation you're talking about was very, very rare. And I want to back up and say that I believe, and I could be wrong, but I think I'm right, that once our pediatrician, who we loved, so this is not about bashing
Hmm.
anybody,
Sure.
there are a lot of hardworking people in the system. So, but I believe that the moment she said, I think it's time to find some help and I'm going to get you some resources, she went to her office and Googled while I went home and Googled.
Oh,
So
yeah.
before we're even talking about intercommunication between the mental health system, how about we back up a little bit? And if you're a pediatrician, if you're an ER doc, if you're a GP, if you're the people, look, I mean, it's just reality. Your plastic surgeons are probably not getting emergency mental health crises walking in their door. So if you are someone who um, have these resources already and have them vetted for the top 5 most common diagnoses that you're seeing come in your door week after week after week. Have you talked to that person? Because if
Yep.
you wouldn't take your own child there, don't send me with my
Yep.
child there if
Yep.
you don't actually know
Yep.
what I'm walking into.
Well said.
So that's one thing I
Yes.
want to say. But I also want to say that the system was telling my husband and I, which rightly was, gosh, you guys really need to get on the same page. We can see you're not on the same page. There was a lot of conflict between the two of us about why this was happening and, what we were going to do about it and all this conflicting information. So they kept telling us, coming in from all these different directions, to get on the same page. Well, how about you get on the same page? How about I don't get a different answer from every human being I talk about? And I get that we cannot oversimplify the matter of mental health, mental illness, because every human being is different. Every
Right.
situation is different. But when you can't get the same answer really from any two people, not the same medication, not, whatever. I mean, we all need to be working together better, especially for our kids.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's so loaded, and that's a problem with the mental health world that we are living in, unfortunately, in this country. I mean, I would like to think that I have a nice group of former clients. They still call me now for as a resource. I don't see them, but they're calling me now. They're calling me for their own kids because I saw them when they were teenagers or they were 17 years old. Now they're in their early 40s. As a resource, because I say this all the time on the podcast too. Vet your people. Vet your people. Vet the therapists and vet. And I'm also a life coach. Vet the life coaches. I mean, vet the life coaches. I say that all the time because that's it's a little bit of a world of lack of it's not a regulated profession, and they don't need to go through what licensed mental health people go through, but still, you've got to vet these people. You have to ask them about their experience. You have to feel like they're fit for you. They're somebody you might want to talk to. There are people I've said I wouldn't send my dog to, and I love my dog, so they're very valuable to me. But you know what I mean? Like, there are people I wouldn't. No, 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 don't go there. I don't. I have to say that. I mean,
I
I got to
totally
be
do.
honest. Yeah.
That's the experience we had with the first residential treatment center. It was a nightmare. And I mean, we could spend hours just talking about teen
Right.
residential treatment
Yeah.
facilities in this country and how little oversight the places have where we're sending our sickest children who need the most help and who are working
Yes.
with the least experienced clinicians. So, I
Hmm.
mean, we could go on and on in regard to that. But yeah, I took the word of someone who said this is a great place, someone in authority who was a specialist and all the things. And, we basically went there sight unseen and dropped our daughter off there. And it 100% caused more harm than good. She was
Yeah.
there for like 2 weeks and they kicked her out for doing what they knew she was going to do because they took her in for engaging in self harming behavior and kicked her out for that.
Oh.
So there was all kinds of problems with that place. And it did more harm to our relationship. I mean, we basically, of course, the message we were trying to send to our child was not, you're so bad off right now
Right.
that we can't even deal with you. And so we're sending you away. That is not the message we were trying to send, but it certainly was the message that she
That she
received, keeping in
got.
mind she
Yeah.
was 14 years old at that
Right.
time. So, there was the teen aspect on top of everything. But we had that just added more healing work for all of us that needed to be done because it was such a traumatizing decision experience to go through, and then having it fall apart so quickly, it impacted all of us, most of all my daughter.
And yeah, and it compounded the problems, the reasons why she went in, that compounded them why she came out, because oftentimes kids are like, okay, so I really am a problem that I'm getting kicked out of this. You brought me here and now I'm getting kicked out. I can't even be seen here. So I really am that effed up. Um, I hear that a lot. Okay. So what happens to you? And that's just what I love about the book, is that your transparency, your vulnerability, and on these pages, there's this current of, you're telling your daughter's story, your experience as a mother of your 14-year-old daughter who's going through an eating disorder and then develops self-harm. And we just have been talking about the psychiatric world and treatment facilities and getting her the right care. Your mother had just died. This is a complicated grief, so you're dealing with the death of your own mother, and that's loaded with all of its own stuff, as it is for, if not all, many, many of us, right? Stuff comes to the surface, things percolate. So you're also, as a person, dealing with the passing of your own mother, which was unexpected. These issues come up within your daughter, but what you write about is what was happening within you from an emotional and a psychological perspective. So can you tell us about what started to come up for you and what you were grappling with really this entire time you were trying to help and manage your daughter?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it was devastating. I mean, it was just devastating in every way. And as a mom, of course, I wanted to fix the situation, but also, and I did not know this at the time, it wouldn't become clear to my understanding until much later that the childhood trauma I experienced, the relational trauma of being raised in an environment, and this is, a lot of words throwing around, the a narcissistic mom with the rejection and the neglect of my childhood experience, and an enmeshed experience with my father and overdependent. This is not about parent bashing. This is about
Mhm.
understanding the forces that form us and then we carry with us totally unconsciously through our lifetime. So fast forward to me having a daughter diagnosed with mental illness, and I'm trying to fix this situation. I'm rationally know that I cannot control it, but emotionally, that's what I'm still trying to do, right? I want the behaviors to stop. I want her to get better. Life is chaos all around us. And I am in a shame spiral, just getting worse and worse and worse feeling about myself because I can't control this. I can't do these things for her. I can't make it any better. So it's the, equivalent of the 1-2 punching that just keeps coming as the experience. We're doing everything we're told. Nothing is working. I'm trying to listen to the instructions. I'm trying to do them. She's getting sicker. And it's just this spiral. I got into therapy right away after my daughter's diagnosis because I knew that I was not going to be able to handle this situation on my own. And she kept asking me, my therapist, week after week after week, what can you do to take care of yourself? First of all, I completely 100% missed the fact that she was asking me to do the same thing I wanted my daughter to do, which was to,
Yeah.
take better care of herself. Missed that fact completely. I was enraged. Like, what are you talking about? I don't have the right to do that. That's not something a mother would do. I mean, our understanding of self-care
Yeah.
is, completely skewed. We just don't get it. And I didn't get it. And I didn't understand why I didn't get it and whatever. So it wasn't until a year plus, closer probably to 2 years, that I started to understand when things kept not working out, and we were ending up in the emergency room and then back in treatment and it was just, it's hard to explain if someone hasn't been through it. If you've been through it, and you
Yes.
don't even need me to say as much as I've said because you already know what's happening. But yes, inside of me, there was such a shame spiral, and I had lived my life with low self-esteem and never identified myself anywhere in trauma language because I did not have experiences that we associate with traumatic childhoods, because I'm, not a veteran. All the ways we understand trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse, poverty, all these things, that was not my experience. So
Right.
I never saw myself anywhere. I just thought it was me and that, like, I was fucked up. And so then by the time my daughter gets a diagnosis, it's like the ultimate confirming of my worst nightmare,
Of your
that
fucked upness.
somehow my fucked upness
Yeah.
has, passed down to my daughter.
Yeah.
There it is. I did it, and all the thing. I don't feel that way now, of course, but that's how I felt then. And then
Sure.
the experience that we kept facing in the system, to my mind, was reinforcing that. So then ultimately we get to, there's a scene in the book when we're in residential treatment with my daughter and we have this simple exercise to do, which is like this pie chart thing that we're supposed to, just all of us were there. It was group family therapy. So all the kids, all the parents, everyone was there. And we had to, like, identify how fulfilled inside of ourselves we felt in these various areas, like our spirituality and our emotional health and all these things. Well, here I am. I'm like, this is the worst moment of our lives. Our children were all here. Our children are in treatment. Like, they're struggling. She's right next to me, crying and everything. So, of course, I barely filled my chart in. We were supposed to color it. So mine was like mostly white. And I'm like, everybody here, is going to be the same because we're all going through this experience. And unbeknownst to me, we did actually then afterwards have to go around and everyone had to say their chart out loud. So I'm listening to
Out
these
loud.
people out loud. I'm listening, which of course they didn't tell us, or I would have lied. I mean, I 100% would have lied. So maybe it's good they didn't tell us. I mean, I'm sure that was the plan all along. But everyone's going through saying I'm 80, 90, 100% fulfilled. And, like, they had one area maybe that they were like, well, this one, not so much. But all these other ones I feel great about. And I'm sitting there getting smaller inside myself and smaller and smaller and smaller. So filled with shame. It's hard to, which is that knowing that there is something wrong with you. So again, ultimately, but now, I was in my 40s when we're having this experience. I'm 55
Yeah.
now. So every step of my life up to that point, and now this pie chart has reinforced for me what a terrible person I am. And of course, or maybe not of course, literally the only person in the room whose chart looked the most like mine was my daughter's. So this is a moment for
Okay.
me of complete emotional rock bottom when I realize, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it even now. I have to, as a mom, I 100% have to continue facilitating the best possible treatment I can for my daughter, but I have got to get my shit together. Like, I am looking at the manifestation of all of my history that I didn't understand then the way I do now. And I don't know how all the mechanisms worked, but here's my daughter, the person I love most in the world, who thinks exactly as little about herself as I think about myself, and maybe even worse at that point. The
Yeah.
only person I can
Yeah.
control in this equation is me. And I actually have to start finding out how to heal this relationship I have with myself. Now, at that moment, I still did not understand ultimately what that was going to mean or look like, or how we really only do have control over ourselves, and how people who have had a childhood like mine, if you like the emotionally immature parenting lingo, or you like the lack of attachment lingo, lack of security, whatever you like. I mean, people, words, they're complicated
Hmm.
because people understand things all so differently. But I had to heal myself in order to be able to heal my relationships, which is a separate matter from my daughter doing her healing work. She had her journey that she was on, and I had mine, and that the best gift I could give to our relationship was to take responsibility for myself. And I really would have rankled against this language. If I were sitting here then, I would have really rankled about that, because I would have felt like, what the fuck are you talking about? I am taking, like, it just didn't make sense to me then, but it certainly does now, because I was the product of this environment where I didn't know really what I thought or felt. I didn't know why I was so fixated on this tight, constricted relationship with my daughter, and how enmeshed we were. Many people know that word now. Or how the minute she had an emotional reaction, I was having an emotional reaction, and off to the races we were. And so it's not that I'm saying a parent is supposed to never react when their child is hurting or having emotions. Of course not. We're human beings, we're parents, but what do we do with it? And I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what I should do with it. I didn't know I needed to do something with it, all the things. So, as simple as it sounds, an important step in this was simply learning how to be able to stay calm if she was becoming upset about something, not to just glom onto that and say the things I would have always said, which is like, it's okay, you're okay, whatever the things are that were very unhelpful. And she'd been trying to express that all along, but I just couldn't hear it. So I had to learn how to work inside myself and be like, I'm a separate person. I'm okay right now, even if she isn't. I can be here with
Yeah.
her,
Boundaries.
yes,
Boundaries.
exactly, be
Yeah.
in the face of this and still be okay. So it was a very lengthy process. I probably just went on and on more than you wanted me to. But yeah, ultimately, the big moment was realizing that I had my own work to do and I needed to do it.
When you talk about that pie chart that they had you fill out in the family, I used to run those multifamily groups, so I know exactly what you're talking about. When they had you fill out that chart, and what you said in the book was that you looked around and you saw other people's charts, and they were using, like, you were using different colors, and you would see, like, some people would have, like, the physical part like shaded like green, like more than halfway, like 80 or 90%, or the mental part was 50%, and yours was like a dot in
My
like
daughters.
almost each of the categories. Like, you had like no color. You shaded nothing, and neither did your daughter.
Yeah,
So,
yes. It wasn't
right?
nothing. My daughter was the dot in her physical, because she had such an unhealthy, with her eating disorder, and a healthy and
Okay,
unrealistic view of her body.
right.
But yes, I had a little bit more color than she did. But essentially, yes. I mean, ours looked the most alike, and everyone else's looked different, for sure.
But you were struck by, yeah, you were struck by the people around you. Yeah,
Of
yeah.
course I
And
was.
then you've said a couple of times, and just for the listener or the people who are watching, if you can explain this for you, you've mentioned shame spiral. So can you connect the dots to your daughter's mental illness And why were you in a shame spiral from where you came from? What is it about her? Because I'm sure people are listening, like, well, why is the mom feeling ashamed? Why is the mom ashamed? Her daughter has an eating disorder and they're getting her help and they're confused and they don't know what to do because the medical professionals, the psychiatric clinical professors aren't really helping them. But why is mom ashamed? So can you make that connection to your childhood and your being raised, and why were you ashamed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because I mean, this is what I'm saying in terms of the inheritance of generational trauma. And I thought back then that everybody's thoughts ruminated the way mine did. I thought we all felt the same way about ourselves, like, bad about ourselves and like that we're not good enough. I thought there was a certain element, the overthinking that everyone does. Like, I didn't even know the word boundaries at that point, so I couldn't have even identified that. But relative to the generational trauma and inheriting those patterns, first, I want to say again, this is not about parent blaming because I never had more compassion for my parents than I did when I woke up to the reality of the constraints on them as well. But the type of childhood that I had, my parents were supposed to, so they brought a lot of history with them before they met. That was not great. So things get passed down from even further than that. Then they got together. So then more things happen. And then I was supposed to have a baby sister who was stillborn. And this is something that was never, ever, ever discussed. Like most of the time, I didn't even remember I was supposed to have a baby sister, but they certainly remembered they were supposed to have another child. But no one was dealing with the mourning, the grief, the pain.
Nobody was talking about it. No one talked
Nobody was
about it.
talking about it, right. So silence we know
Yeah.
now, we didn't know then, but silence just keeps all of this ingrained. So
Yep.
I'm this little kid who then add other factors on top of that. So the things I was talking about before relationally with enmeshment over here and kind of rejection over there. Well, my mother is in full mourning for this child. She was full term when the baby was stillborn. So up until the minute the baby came out and was dead, they thought they were having another baby. So
Yeah.
she got
And you were
very
2 years old?
I was
You were
2.
2 year old?
I
Yeah.
was 2, right. So she of course got extremely depressed
Yeah.
and was
Yeah.
living in this grief and could not take care of me the way that I needed to be taken care of. But when we're 2 and younger, when things are going on, like we're still in the womb and all of these things, we're being conditioned by our parents, by all kinds of things. And then when our parents are unable to meet us the way we need to be met, meaning they cannot validate our emotions for whatever reason. They tell us because this is their story to like get over it, you're fine, everything's okay, or they just don't acknowledge you at all, go play in your room, all the things. It sounds so mundane to us as adults because we have discernment, we have more cognitive ability to think about those things and be like, well, that's not really a big deal. But when you're a toddler, you do not have the ability to do that.
Right.
You are simply not getting your needs met, and the message is getting reinforced over and over because there's no other message to hear or to get that it must be me. Now, again,
Yeah.
that's not like a rational thought. We're 2. Like,
Right.
this is just the message we get, and it gets reinforced over and over and over again. So we grow up knowing what we know, not knowing what we don't know, and I knew by the time I became an adult that my relationship with my mother was very difficult and had always been, and with the hyper focus on my body and my weight and what it looked like and all the things. And then my
See,
dad
I
on the
think that's important for us to talk about because you did talk about that quite a bit in the book. I mean, you really grew up with, gosh, I mean, the things your mother said to you. You and I are around the same age. And I have a family member who had a terrible eating disorder when she was in eighth grade and was in and out of residential treatment with therapists. And I was the teenager going to those family therapy sessions with the rest of my siblings and my parents. Um, and it was different, right? I mean, we're more sensitive today about, I think, body image and saying rude things to each other. I mean, we're siblings. We would kind of say mean things to each other. And I know my dad would tease us, but it wasn't funny. We realized later it's not funny, but she was teased a lot. Body image was something your mother really focused on with you, and she was hard on you. The things she'd say to you, and I don't think, I hope that that's not happening as much today in 2024 as it was in the 70s and early 80s. But you got it, Tracy.
Thank you. Yeah. But I mean, again, like, I didn't understand that then. I just thought she
Right,
was right.
right,
Like, it's like,
exactly.
yeah, I'm fat or I'm overweight or, I don't look like everybody else or I need to get my shit together. I mean,
And the shame of not being able, you talked a little bit about, and it was so well, it was, I'm like, so well put, because it's like the shame of, like, your mom would say to you, well, just stop eating, and you would say this in the book, like, stop putting food in your mouth, or just like something about, like, open my pie hole and put it in. And I was like, it was like all degrading of yourself. Like, I could feel that shame of, and your mom said, well, just stop eating. It's like, well, why can't I just, air quote, stop eating? It's it's
exactly.
it's sim it's, like, said so simplistically, and then when we can't simplistically just do it, it's like, well, then what is, then there's something wrong with me, because my friends don't do that. They don't look the way I do, and why there's always skinny girls in middle school and high school. Am I tracking with you on that?
100%.
Yeah,
100%. And then as we age, that just escalates.
right. Yeah,
So it goes from eating behavior to other behaviors that we don't understand why we're doing them. Maybe in the short term, they feel good, but that's not even the right word because
right.
they don't really, but we're doing them. And then we don't understand why we do them. And then the cycle just keeps repeating over and over. But the cost gets even more because we're older now and we can do all kinds of other things that, we don't understand why we're doing. So it's just a spiral, if that's the
Yeah,
right word, or pattern, or whatever word you want to use, that repeats and reconfirms over and over and over and over again. Same with my friendships, having friendships and then having them fall apart. I'm trying so hard. I'm contorting myself into all of these shapes to try and make people happy with me. And somehow they keep leaving me. Well, when we're young, people don't have the wherewithal to want to, ask you, well, why did you say that? Or why are you doing that? They just cut and run because we're
right,
young and that's what we do. So
right.
again, just more reinforcement that it looks so easy for everybody else. There is something so wrong with me. And
With
then,
me.
we get married and we have kids and it starts all over again.
Was there Can you talk at all about the connection between, so you struggled with keeping weight down. Your daughter develops an eating disorder, which turns into anorexia, right?
It started out
Anorexia
that
nervosa.
way. Well, she never got that official diagnosis
Oh,
because
she didn't. Okay.
she didn't actually meet the criteria. So it was bulimia, and that's why they just landed on NOS.
EDNOS was
Yeah,
it?
because
Yeah.
there were a lot of different behaviors going on.
Okay. Okay. So she's doing some of her behaviors, objectively, observantly, are different than maybe yours. What can you make a connection to your growing up years and your issues with food and your daughter's issues with food?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some of it that I can't identify and express because I do believe there's obviously a genetic component.
Mhm.
And these things get passed down genetically, they get passed down energetically, all of that. So again, when she was young, I got into therapy the first time when I was 30 because I knew I had, not a good relationship with my mother. I knew my Weight Watcher leader was my therapist because she was a licensed therapist. So I was in Weight Watchers at that point to lose the baby weight, but it was just one more time in Weight Watchers to get my fat ass, in gear. Um, so I got into therapy because I knew I didn't want to do the same thing my mom did, my
To
parents did to
you.
me. I did
Yeah.
not want to repeat those unhealthy patterns. So I sort of understood it. And I also didn't understand it on the grander, scheme. So I think as so often is the case, I just said to myself, well, I'm going to try and do the opposite. I'm not going to talk about it all the time. I'm not going to criticize every thing she puts in her mouth, all the stuff.
That happened to you. You weren't gonna do that.
Yes, but I
Yeah.
think so we can be becoming a little more conscious but still unconscious to the forces that are controlling us, because I think ultimately that I ended up repeating many of the same things just in a different way. So it was a different energy, but it wasn't all that different in the long run. So I don't know, to this day, I can't tell you, and I'm not sure anyone can exactly, especially for our little kids who are we're taking to the pediatrician and we're getting messages about their weight. I mean, whether we're trying to give them messages or not, they're getting them. Because if you're getting
Yeah.
weight every time you go to the doctor and that dot and the chart is too high, the doctor's talking about it. And we know now, with the obesity problem in our kids, that pediatricians of kids of a certain age can actually prescribe gastric bypass surgery,
I know.
for teenagers.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's just very, very complicated. And so we cannot oversimplify the matter about how many things are coming into play. But for sure, again, having the childhood that I had, all of these messages on one side from my mom, and then sort of like opposite messages from my dad. If I wanted something, he was going to get it for me. I mean, it
Right.
was like, get off her back to my mom, all the things like, let's go get an ice cream cone because we love it. So you're really getting a lot of, I was mixed messages about all of this stuff, and none of which actually belonged to me. But for lack of a better way of saying it, the fact is the damage, quote unquote, was already done. And I
Dad
try
appeased you, and dad often appeased you with maybe food, ice cream. You
absolutely.
loved it. It was outings with him, and he was so good to you. And you tell this one story of when you couldn't fit into your pants. I think it was the end of summer. It was the start of school, and you couldn't fit in. Your mom made a comment to you standing in your doorway, and it was a judgmental put down. And then you were like, okay, try my pants on. And then they didn't fit. You put another pair on, and you did a really good exam. It was a great visual because we've probably all, I know I've been there as a 14, 15-year-old, and trying to get my pants up. Oh, I can't get them over my hips. Or these ones I can get over my hips. Oh, I can't get the zipper up. Oh, I can't get the button. You're pushing the button towards the hole. And then you did I love it. I was like, I know that like we're the same age because the example is the visuals of the Nestea plunge. I'm like, oh yeah. I remember that commercial so well, and I was laughing to myself, like, "Okay, Tracy, I know how old you are." So, like,
Absolutely.
yeah, the nasty plunge on your bed, try to pull up. I used to use a hanger. Isn't that crazy? I used to put a hanger
Pliers.
in yes, and pull up the zipper. So crazy. But you did that, and you were like, "I can't do this. I can't go to school in these." And then you went into your to see your dad, who was in his bedroom, and you were upset. I can't fit in my pants. And he very kind of nonchalantly was like, well, try mine on or something. And you did. And you went and got a belt. And I wondered I wonder what you thought about that, because I thought in a way he was making no big deal out of your body and that you couldn't fit into your pants. It was like, well, go try a pair of mine on. And I thought, oh, I wonder if Tracy thought, did you like that he did that for you? Or did it feel uh, supportive, or did it feel dismissive?
Honestly, I feel like it was kind of both. I
Yeah.
mean, he was ultimately just trying to help me in that moment, but I think that's just another symptom of the problem, in general, and the hyper focus that I experienced of behavior that the one and then ended up repeating, like hyper focused on the behavior rather than what was going on underneath the behavior for me and
Yes.
also for my daughter.
Yes.
So, I mean, yeah. And then, of course, I knew I had to get my shit together again, because I wasn't going to keep wearing my dad's pants to school and all of that kind of stuff. But my point of including that, which was honestly probably the hardest scene in the book for me to include. I
Was it
really,
really?
I
Was
really
it?
went back and forth with that because I
Did
still
you?
feel a lot of shame about that moment, just because, like, again, with as much work as I've done, like, who, the internal language is who, has to wear their dad's pants to school still all these years later, all the things. So this is
But
very
Tracy, it's so raw and it's so real and it's so resonant amongst women. And
well. Thank
I
you.
I mean, it's so resonant for women, and this is not about body shape and size. This is just something, and you talked about it, excuse me, in the book about doesn't matter anything about size. It's just the pressure on this in I think not just in it's also maybe in Europe too, but in North America to be a certain size. And I love that you added that in because I was right there with you, girlfriend. I was right there with you in your eighth grade bedroom or ninth
Mhm.
grade and trying to get those pants on. And I'm like,
Mhm.
and we kind of chuckled about it. I'm like, I remember taking a hanger and pull like it's it brought me back to my early adolescent years. So I just want to say to you, thank you for sharing it because it's like, wow, it's such a lonely time at that time in our lives, 13, 14, 15, and our inner thoughts and feelings, which are wrought with adolescence and hormones. That's just something we don't really even talk to our best girlfriends about how we
Mhm.
feel about our bodies. All of
Mhm.
that stays in our interior world. So I
Yes.
love that thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because certainly that's something another thing I carried through to my adulthood was not talking to the girlfriends I had about that kind of stuff.
Right.
And really even still to this day, we probably don't though
We don't.
I have
No.
friends now. I'm happy to say I've
Yeah.
had friends for many years, so
Yeah.
it's thrilling. But that, is not something we really hyper focus on anymore in our conversation or like
Hmm.
ever. Which I, on one hand, like, and on the other hand, feel same. Like it's just
Agree.
something that
Yeah.
needs to be discussed more because I think we all still have a lot of baggage going on inside about it.
Hmm.
But yeah, ultimately, my father could not abide disappointing me. And so the point I try to make in the book is that I could not abide disappointing my daughter. This is another pattern. This is another dynamic that got passed down that I
That
repeated.
shows up now with you as a mother.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So I could not abide disappointing her with stuff, and I couldn't abide disappointing her with food, even though I had such a complicated relationship with food. And I try to be very careful when I'm talking about this because I do not want anyone to hear the message that I feel like I am responsible for my daughter's mental illness, meaning that I created her mental
Hmm.
illness. But these patterns are very unhelpful and very hurtful. So that is part of the idea when I say I needed to take responsibility for myself means I had to understand these patterns and what was actually a healthier dynamic, not only for myself first, because it all starts with us, but then to work on allowing that healthier dynamic inside me to come out and be part of my relationships with the people I cared about most first. And then after that, it started going out to making new friends, which felt terrifying for me for a long time, not anymore. But you start with yourself
Right.
and understand these dynamics, relational dynamics. So better communication, all the stuff that maybe people like roll their eyes about. And again, if you're going through now what we were going through then, I get it. But ultimately, nobody likes to hear this. Ultimately, the only person we can control is ourselves.
Yep.
And none of us are perfect. All of us have things that we've been, handed down to us that maybe were fine until our child got diagnosed. Maybe, their like life was going along like ours was, and then something happens and it's not the same anymore. Well, now you probably need to learn a new way of doing things. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means life has changed and now what worked before worked no longer works. And we have to change that. And we start the only place we can, which is with ourselves.
It's important to me that the supplements I take are of the highest quality. And that's why for 5 years, I've been drinking AG1. Unlike many supplement brands, AG1 conducts relentless testing to set the standard for purity and potency. I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because it's tested for 950 contaminants and banned substances, while the industry standard typically only tests for 10. Taking care of my health shouldn't be complicated, and AG1 simplifies this by covering my nutritional basis and setting myself up for success in just 60 seconds. AG1's ingredients are heavily researched for efficacy and quality, And I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. So if you want to replace your multivitamin and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1 year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/Anna. That's drinkag1.com/Anna. Check it out. You will not regret it. What comes out in the book is the importance of doing one's own inner work in life. And that, and I was going to say this before, we're talking about eating disorders. We're talking about food. With you growing up in your relationship with food, with your daughter in her relationship with food, whether it be too much or too little. I say this all the time. I just said it yesterday to a client. It is not about the food. It's not about the food. The food is just a
100%.
manifestation of what is going on the inside that we're not talking about and or we're not dealing with. And that's what you write about so well in this book, Bloodlines, is almost like it's like via your daughter's mental illness, you met yourself.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry that that had to go that way because, of course, as a mother, that's the
Mhm.
last thing I want to be reality.
Sure,
But it
sure.
is reality. And I mean, I think it's important to say, since we're talking about it, like, this is not something I did for a long time. I gained 40 pounds when my daughter got diagnosed. And in the first maybe year or maybe a little more, I don't really remember the exact timing, but I gained 40 more pounds on top of everything and drank a lot because the pain was so intense and I
Right.
had no other way to cope with it. So, this is something I want people to hear because I feel like we're all judging each other all the time, whatever. It was a real wake up moment of who the fuck am I to judge?
Yes.
Maybe her coping mechanisms are not as socially acceptable as mine because, it's something that we hide under the rug more with self harm. But gaining 40 pounds, drinking a bottle of wine, by myself regularly, is that any different ultimately? So again, we lost the forest for the trees with her behavior, which makes sense because it was life threatening behavior.
Right.
But to your point, it wasn't about the food. And I'm not saying she was never dealing with other things in therapy. I was not
Right.
in her one on one therapy. I know that my mother's death came up. Bullying was a huge problem. She had been
Yeah.
bullied from the time she was little. So bullying played into this enormously, as it did in my own childhood as well, with reinforcing all of these negative messages. So, but but ultimately, yeah, I mean, who are we to judge? We're all dealing with something. It's the old
Totally.
iceberg thing, right? We only see the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. So, can I ask you how is your daughter today? How are you and your husband? How is the family doing today? The book has come out. It's out in the world. How you feeling about it?
Yeah, well, I feel amazing about it, to be honest. I was so still terrified before it came out, terrified of what people would say about us after reading, a teeny tiny little slice of our lives. It's not the full measure of who we are, but the reception of the book has been amazing. I appreciate your kind words because I am, I think, achieving what I hoped I would, which is to be honest and vulnerable and real enough that other people see themselves in these pages.
Yes.
So, and know that they're not alone ultimately. So, that was my reason for writing it and putting it out into the world. And yeah, talking about my relationships today, especially with my daughter, who, as I said, is going to be 26 in December. It's not perfect because nothing ever is, but
Right.
we know we can talk to one another. She's read the book. She knows more about me, which is something I think many of us don't think about imparting to our kids because our parents didn't impart it to us. So why would
Right.
we, all that stuff gets in the way. So yeah, we are great. I'm going to go up and see her next week and we're going to spend some time together. And it's just unlike anything I ever experienced with my parents. And so I feel that I have broken many of the patterns, not all of them, of course. I
Right.
mean, by the time, she was 13, 14, by the time we started doing this work. So some things are certainly there. We talk a lot about people pleasing and things of this nature. But the point is, we can talk about it. And I
Yeah,
can say
absolutely.
to her, here's a pattern you got from us. Look, we love you more than life itself. But here's the fact of the matter. Like you got this, message from both of us. So let's talk about it because it's really not the healthiest. And we don't, talk about that all the time.
Right, right.
But knowing that we can is amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. How and did you continue to work on your issues with your mother in your own therapy? You know, did you continue at all? Did you need to even?
Well, yes. I mean, so I actually did not get the kind of the last insight. It's not the last, it's never the last one. But as I was rewriting the book for this final version that came out, I was back in therapy again. Been in and out of therapy for 25 years. I can't
Mhm.
recommend it enough to people
Yeah,
to find
right.
someone who, is really good at what they do and can help you if you can do it at all. But this therapist was actually all this therapy. Let me tell I've been in a lot of therapy over the years. So it wasn't until this therapist where I was complaining, really, because there were parts of the book that were not working and I did
Right.
not understand why. What am I missing? And I had been working with her long enough that she knew my history. So she goes, "Look, for better or worse, I'm a very also people like me, we need to know why. Like we overthink, we want to understand, we have to know why, we have to know the mechanism. And when you're writing a book, you need to know why." So she handed me a clinician's guide to treating the adult survivors of childhood narcissistic neglect and rejection and all these things. And I mean, that was sort of the final piece of this puzzle.
Mm,
Again, this is not about blaming someone else. This is about understanding.
yeah.
And for me, and I now have a diagnosis, as so many people do, of chronic or complex PTSD, relational wounding.
Yeah.
My relationships from the very beginning were crafted in such a way that I carried a very unhealthy understanding with me into my adult life. Now, both my parents were dead by the time I have this realization, but that does not mean that we cannot repair that relationship inside of ourselves.
Yes.
And some people like the word like kind of rewriting the narrative, or whatever, again, whatever language works for you. But I do continue this work because part of healing is forgetting. So that's another thing people don't like to hear because healing takes a long time. It's just a fact of the matter. And these patterns have been around a really long time. So it can be very easy to fall back into sort of thinking the old way of thinking. But the thing is I'm aware now. I catch myself and I don't live there like I used to. And this is the gift of becoming more conscious and aware of these patterns is seeing them, knowing they're happening, not trying to shut down like in the old day and toss back a bottle of wine, or whatever. No,
Right.
that doesn't
Numb
actually
out.
create yeah,
Numb
that
out,
doesn't
right?
that
Yeah.
doesn't actually help. But
Right.
but it has been such a gift to have this all be in the fore and to remember so much more quickly every single time it happens. It gets quicker, and once you get a taste of life on the other side, I think people get waylaid from healing because it's hard, and it
Yes.
gets harder before it gets easier. But once you get a taste on the other side of not living in that oppressive situation inside your own self, you do not want to go back. You just don't want
You
to
never
go
want to
back
go there
anymore
again.
because
Yeah.
the embodiment of how you feel in your own skin. And that doesn't mean I suddenly lost 80 pounds and I'm walking around thin. As you can see, that's not the case. But I don't judge my worth on the size of my
Right.
pants anymore because that
Right.
has nothing to do with who I am.
Nothing. Right.
And so it's such a freer feeling that I hope for anyone who's struggling, they can kind of stick with it until they get a glimpse of it because then, once you get a glimpse of it, you're in.
You said there was another part of the book where you talked about, and it's interesting because I say this all the time with my clients, and I say it on the podcast. I say it all the time. I don't think, and this is just my opinion, I think you might agree, but tell me if you don't. I don't think life's purpose is to look for happiness, and that's why I push and I rail a little bit against joy, finding joy. Okay, I mean, I know we could have a conversation about that some other time, but like finding joy. Okay, I know, like I do have joy in my life, but I don't think that, and people come to me and I say to them, whether it be coaching or therapy, I say, my job is not to make you happier. That's your job. But I don't even like the word happy. I think if there's anything you're going to go for, it's going to be peace and contentment in your life. And you said that in the book, and I have never heard another person say that. So I'm like, yes, I love this. Tracy, it was because I'm like, okay, so yeah, it just felt like an alignment because I talk about that all the time. I don't think that the goal is we're not going to be happy every day. We're not going to be happy every week. We're going to go through months and unfortunately, maybe years of being unhappy. We got to look for contentment and peace within ourselves. And in that, you may find a quiet joy and a quiet happiness.
What can I say? I could not agree any 100 trillion% more. I mean, 100%. And I think, we've been sold a bill of goods. It's just one more thing we've been sold a bill of goods about being happy all the time. What I think happened for me, and I love that you pointed this out because, again, this feeling of peace and contentment comes from doing your own work, from learning how to trust yourself, from taking responsibility for yourself, for understanding where these patterns came from and why they're impacting you and how you actually have control over yourself and working on them. Doesn't mean they go away. Maybe some
Right,
of them ever instantly, not at all. But for sure, again, once you have that sense, it's an embodied. The longer I do this, the more I talk all the time about how we're walking around with our heads detached from our body, especially people who are raised the way I was and other similar types of things. We have been cut off from the experience that's happening inside our body. We're in our head 100%. Again, the over ruminating, all the things. So the longer I do this and am allowing myself to reconnect to my body and allowing myself to feel all feelings, right?
hmm
We're not allowed to be angry, but we are allowed to be happy. And
hmm
all the messages we get, particularly as women in this culture, that it's just,
toxic positivity.
yeah, it's all
So,
bullshit.
yeah,
And
it's
until we
bullshit.
can allow ourselves to have the full range of human experience that just is part of being alive, and then understanding that, okay, there's some things like I am not going to like cure my shame, quote unquote, but I certainly can feel it. I certainly can acknowledge it. I can certainly sense it in my body and actually thank it for trying to keep me safe. I can acknowledge, especially with guilt, because they're not the same thing. I think a lot of people know that now, but not
You're
maybe
right,
not
right,
everybody. But
right.
especially like when guilt comes in, is this actually mine?
Yeah,
Where, like, I don't even think this is mine. And I have started, there's a great book out. Of course, right now I'm going to forget the name of it. Sorry, Mark Wolin. It's about inheriting trauma. Oh, it didn't start with you. That's what
it
it's
didn't
called. It
start
didn't
with
start
you.
with you.
Yeah.
Didn't start with them
Mhm.
either. So when I can actually say out loud, this isn't mine to no one,
Right.
I'm just by myself in my room feeling all of these things. And I can be like, wait a minute, this isn't mine. No, thank you. I am allowed to take care of myself. I'm not actively boundaries. Other people may not like them, but if they're
Right.
healthy boundaries, they don't actually hurt other people. They help
Right.
us and other have better relationships with other people. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm taking care of myself. I am allowed to do this. I
So
am
this is the
allowed.
self-care we're talking about. This is the
Yes.
true deeper self-care, which is so important.
Exactly. And I'm
Right.
allowed to set boundaries. I'm allowed, I didn't talk about the word values or think about values again until I was in my 40s. I'm allowed to have my own values.
Right.
I am allowed to determine a spirituality that works for me, that has nothing to do with the system that I was raised in or
Right.
even anything that maybe is considered traditional. Like I get to take care of myself in that way.
Right.
Goddamn straight I do.
Right.
But
Right.
if you've never had that experience before, it is mind blowing to understand that you actually can and should, but this is the good kind of should, as opposed to the shitty kind of should.
Right.
Yes, take care of ourselves. Taking care of ourselves, especially as moms, somebody else says it this way, is an act of service for our children. That's
Yeah.
another great way to say it. Doing this work, taking care of ourselves is how we stay engaged in the healthiest way, is how we take care of the people we love the most the healthiest way. All
Right.
of these things. I mean, I cannot stress enough how much that blew my mind.
I think it's work, and I think that, that's something that, I don't know if it's scary when I say that to people, and it's true. I mean, it might be a little scary. It can be daunting to do the inner work to move out of shame. You talking about being in a shame spiral, talking about shame, is probably helping you come out of it, because shame lives in the dark. Shame can't stand the light, right? So, you talking about it lessons and lessons and lessons the shame. But, when we say it's work, and you've done the work and you're still doing it, I'm still doing it, we have to wrestle and wrangle with ourselves to move out of our messaging and move out of the narratives and the old ways of generational trauma, or the ways in which we were raised, that even at my age of 55 now, I've done a lot of work on myself to have, healthy boundaries, and to move myself out of some of the old ways of thinking within which I was raised in a very conservative Catholic upbringing. And still at my age now, something will come in, and it will show up more with my daughters. My daughter, who's 27, we just talked about it recently, and she was like, it was something that I wasn't proud of with myself, the way I was treating her, and something I said to her kind of snarky, and she's like, "Mom, that's like how you were raised, and you're talking to me like that." And it's true. It's true. And it takes work to have to be open to listening to what she's saying to me, to let go of something I'm for some reason holding firmly onto. It truly is like I'm like wrestling with myself. And there's the work. Would you agree with that?
100% again.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
100% again. And for me, I had to learn also that I didn't actually know what compassion was. So,
Mhm.
my therapist, who I'd been working with again for a long time, by the time she confronted me with this, I stormed out of her office literally because I'm like, if I'm not the compassionate one in this fucking equation, who is? And came home, started ripping books off my shelf because that's how I roll. It's because I was going to prove her wrong. And of course, she wasn't wrong. So I had to like realize this comes from in part, the authoritarian style of parenting that we all of our generation got, which was, you're going to listen to me, you're going to do what I say because I'm the parent. That's how it works, blah, 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 all the stuff. So kind of not engaging with our children as human beings, rather from that, we're the authority. And I'm not saying parents, don't have to set boundaries and do these things. And that's not what I'm saying, but our children are human beings. Like, I had to understand that about my parents as well. Separate
Right.
from their role as my parent, separate as my daughter's role as my daughter, we are human beings. And I am not less than or more than any of those roles.
Right.
So, yes, to your point exactly. It's like we got messages again that are really hard to break, and plus I now understand that kind of snarky quote unquote sense of humor, because it's actually not funny for me anyway, is a symptom of my
Right.
childhood. Again,
Yeah.
because I was ridiculed a lot and belittled, I did not understand this. Right. So we repeat these things because why? Of course we would.
And
Of
it's
course we would.
amazing how it kind of like comes in. I'm like, oh, yeah, I did just do that. Where'd that come from? Well,
Yeah.
I know where it came from. And all I have to say, and
Yes.
I love, you say that a lot in the book, and I'll let you go soon, because I could talk to you for hours about all of this. But it's learning to say I'm sorry. And I think that parents need to, because the generation of our parents didn't do that. Not
Ever.
very much. Some did, but not very well.
Mhm.
Learning to say, my daughter called me out on something, learning to say, I'm sorry, you're right. I did do that. I did say that to you. And mea culpa, like my bad. I'm sorry. I will work on that.
Yes,
And I
and or
think we
even beating them to the punch, right?
yeah,
Because if they're stuck in similar patterns, they might not have the wherewithal to say, "She did. Thank goodness your daughter
right.
did." But, like, sometimes I feel like my daughter isn't quite there yet, where she'll be like, "Whoa, wait a minute." Sometimes she will, but I'll be like, "Oh my gosh." Like, I'll see something usually after the fact, because that's how these things work, and I'll be like, "Oh, I am so sorry I said that," or whatever. So, yeah, and even repairing, like, is more complicated. I think all of these things, like, we hear these big words: compassion, gratitude, healing, recovery, repair. These are big
Yes.
words that mean something different to everyone, and we
Yes.
rarely take the time to make sure we're on the same page even about those things.
Mhm.
So, yes, I mean, but the thing is, I can imagine, like, if 12 years ago, if I were sitting here listening to our very conversation, I would have probably been completely overwhelmed and going, what the fuck are they even talking about? Like, just so agitated because I didn't understand all of this. So, what I want to say is, wherever you are in the process, just do one thing, but one thing you will actually do. That's another thing I had to learn, right? Because I was using things like self care. I love a good massage, but, going to the gym,
Mani
being
pedi.
on a diet,
Right. Right.
we can weaponize those things against ourselves just as easily. So be judicious about the tool you're choosing, why you're choosing it, and starting out, just pick one thing
One thing.
that you will actually do. Is it therapy? Will you show up for yourself one time a week for therapy? Is it journal writing? That was always a big thing for me. I love to journal write. So will you show up really, not every day, not an
Right.
hour every day. These people who say you got to do something every day, that's, to me, is just as unrealistic. But
Yeah.
what one thing will you do? And just start there.
Mhm. Okay. That's actually a really wonderful way to end this conversation. So thank you, Tracy. Really, thank you. And thank you for the gift of writing this book and the gift to all of those out there. People are looking for these stories, they're looking for support, they're looking for recognition and acknowledgement and the feeling that I'm not alone. So, once again, Tracy's book, for those on YouTube or watching, it's called Bloodlines. Where can they find the book? And if they want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Thank you. Yes. Well, it's available everywhere books are sold. So, whatever your favorite spot is to purchase books, you can find it there. And you can find me on my website, which is my name, Tracy Yokas, and then creates. So, tracyyokascreates.com. I have a lot of resources on there that I'm giving away and that I'm creating. I'm really trying to get a dialogue going. It's hard because I know people are reticent, but I'm trying to get a dialogue going, building a community where we feel safe talking about these things and taking care of ourselves, and what does that actually look like, and all that jazz. So,
Oh, great.
anyone, I'd be happy to hear from you. I'm always happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for providing that service. It's so, so needed.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Tracy.
Okay,
Thanks
awesome.
again.
Yeah.
All right.